Okay, we are live. Whew. Um, yeah. So as people start to appear, I'll just make the warning right off the bat that this live show, it's going to be really hard to discuss Messenger by Lois Lowry. Hello. Uh, Without talking about the other books in the series. So for anyone who's going to tune in, just be aware that we're definitely going to be spoiling things that happen related to The Giver and Gathering Blue. And I'm not sure how we're into this we can last without spoiling things from Messenger as well. So
Yeah,
tune in once you've done the reading, is what I'll say.
it's short, so
It's so short, the shortest of the whole series.
yeah.
Um, but other than that, welcome. We're very excited to discuss the third book in the Giver series. Excited and scared.
Yeah, I have a lot of just various emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, Things that, well, okay, some content warnings, things that are definitely going to be mentioned in discussion and are also themes in the book that you see are death and grief and ableism. In the book, there's also some like gore, blood, body horror ish stuff. I don't think we're going to be discussing that in detail, but
Yeah.
it is in the book. So, do what you need to do. Take care of yourself. But I'm really excited just to hear about your feelings, Kara. So, can I just start off with like, what did you end up landing on for a rating? How did you like this book overall as a whole?
Okay.
I know there's a lot to unpack immediately.
There really is. So I am much more conflicted about this book than either of the two others. I also should mention, in case people are just tuning into this one, I have not read this series before,
Mm-hmm.
but I loved the first two books when Julia and I discussed them. This one, I think if I had to pick a rating, which I will be at some point, it feels kind of like a 3.5 because there are some parts that are so good. Like the things that she does well in the other books, she still does incredibly well here. Like the way that she sets up these communities so subtly, and the like building dread is just unmatched.
Yeah.
The characterization is great. I love her writing. I think we talked about this, I think, for both of the previous books, but like I think Lois Lowry is one of those authors who doesn't get enough credit for how good her writing style is because it's very deceptively simple.
Yeah.
And you might, like, if you're not thinking too hard about it, you might just sort of breeze through it and not think about the writing at all. But she's so intentional. She's so good with her word choices. Like, yeah, so that was great. But this one, and I know that Julia, I think we had talked about this previously. This book is very odd in that, like, it seems more outright, like, magical for some of it.
Yes.
And I feel like that takes away from how effective and powerful the story is. Like, I don't think that was necessary. I actually think that the themes and the ideas and the things that happen in these books, I think they're stronger when we don't know. Like, and with The Giver and Gathering Blue, I think it was just enough of like, is there something magical going on? Like, I think it worked. And here, I don't think that worked as well because it was much more explicitly like, some people are magic.
Uh-huh.
And kind of along with that, I think that the one of the like main antagonists of this like came out of nowhere in a way that like I really thought we were going to deal with that, and it turns out it was sort of just a little side detail. Like, where did I'm trying not to like get
Yeah.
specific, like, where did this person come from? Obviously what they're doing is a huge part of the bad stuff happening, so like why don't we know anything about them? um
Mm-hmm.
so that's like my one of my two big critiques. And then the other one is that like I understand from a storytelling perspective why Lois Lowry made a choice that she did. I like I can see why it would feel necessary. Like there has to be some cost. Uh, but I don't like the way it played out here. I just don't think, like, it's so unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it was necessarily set up as well as it could have been. Um, yeah, so like a lot of things I loved about the book, but like the two big things I didn't were hard to sort of get over.
Mm-hmm. Love this for us because as we go through the series, we just continue to feel the exact same way about each of the books. So I also gave it like 3.5 stars. I know you're kind of still deciding, but that's what you said a moment ago, and that's
Yeah,
what I gave it.
I'm pretty sure that's what I'm gonna land at. So
Um, and again, yeah, it's like her storytelling and her writing, I think, is so subtly powerful. Like it's not fanciful, but
mm-hmm.
like when she phrases something just right, I'm like, oh, Lois, you've done it again. Like so
Mm-hmm.
good. Um, Obviously, we get some characters in this book that we're already familiar with, so I enjoyed spending more time with them. Um, but yeah, the ending really throws me for a loop.
I'm like, hey, why?
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about it a lot later. Actually, the whole my whole like bullet list note is kind of all over the place because I just couldn't decide like the order to talk about these things because there's so much going on in such a short book.
Yeah.
Like it's wild to me actually. And I think that's also like it did a disservice to the story because, and again, I'm like getting ahead of myself here, but like the theme of sacrifice is very like ingrained in the story from the beginning with the trading that's going on.
Yeah.
But then I think the way it plays out doesn't help answer questions from the beginning of the story.
Yeah. Like,
So,
I feel like the trading and the forest should have been two separate stories, two
yes,
separate books. Because, like,
agreed.
each of them is plenty by itself. And if we were going to do both of them, the book needed to be longer. And I
Mhm.
think those two things had to connect to each other more obviously.
Yes, yeah, they seem too
Yeah.
disparate to me. It feels like there needs to be a tie-in that makes the trading like somehow responsible for the
Right.
issues
And I
of
kind of
course.
thought we were going to get that at some point, and we never do. Like, we don't even get hints about, like, I don't know. I guess maybe we're meant to assume that because those are, like, we're supposed to view them as having the same, like, root problem of, like, selfishness and not caring about others. But, like, with the forest, I don't even know, like, we don't even really know
Why it was.
why it happened. Like, yeah, like, it's sort of implied, because those are the only two sort of big conflicts happening. It's sort of implied, I guess, that the trading is causing the thing with the forest, but how and why and where did this come from? And like, what? Like,
Yeah,
magic. There's magic. Like, you
it was
can't.
straight up magic. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Before we go farther into that concept, because I do want to talk about that a lot, I want to just kind of ask you, like, how do you feel about this story as a direct continuation of the first two books, both like conceptually and actually in its execution? Like, how are you
Mhm.
feeling about the three altogether? Because obviously, the experience between reading The Giver and Gathering Blue just feels like I read two books that I enjoyed. And then by the
Yeah.
time you get to this one, you're like, okay, wait, it is a series.
Right. Right. Um, Great question. So I love a good companion series. And I think it's really interesting when it's a case like this where, like, they are companion books in the sense that each main character is different. But when you get to this third book, I definitely think you would need to read the first two, or a lot of things wouldn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Uh,
You're like, why do
yeah,
they keep talking about a sled? That's weird.
right, right. As far as, like, how the book connected, like, I don't love the way that leader is characterized and, like, used in the story. Like, there are things about it This is going to be really hard to say without spoilers.
Just start spoiling stuff.
Okay, all right. So, Jonas.
I was like, I don't think we're gonna make it very long before we can spoil things.
So our boy Jonas, who we know and love,
our precious boy.
There are things about it that just didn't feel right to me. Like the naming thing, I got really hung up on because it reminded me a lot more of the community that he came from, where it's like you are assigned a name and like that's it. Like even with Kira's community, it felt more like an organic thing, you know. It was like, yes, you were given a name, but like as you become more like people respect you more, you get like added to it. Like it just felt different. And so there were things about the way that Jonas was running things that just didn't feel like him. And I didn't love that. I mean, obviously the way that he is like, no, everybody gets to like say what they think. And like, you know, we have like, everybody can read books. Like those things feel like him and those are important. But I don't even know if it was like intentional. Like, are we supposed to like read this book and we're like, okay, so Jonas is doing a really good job, but he's also fallible, you know, like there are some things that he still sort of hasn't like unpacked from where he came from, or is it not supposed to be a red flag? You know, like is the naming convention here supposed to be fine? So I wasn't sure about that. I actually liked the way that we get, like the way that Kira is brought in. This is funny. I had forgotten that Maddie was the name of the character that was in Gathering Blue. And then partway through, oh my god, yeah, I know what this is. But like I liked that. I do kind of wonder, where's Gabriel? Like what happened?
He has a little cameo. There's like one line about him.
Okay, because I couldn't remember if we're told what happened.
I'll find it. Keep talking. He is in the village.
Okay, good. I was like, where is
and he's alive, thank God.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I think similarly to my overall thoughts on the book is like there were some parts of like the way it connected that I really liked. And I also think that it fits in really well with the first two books being like, here is a community where some things look like really good ideas on the surface, but they actually do horrible damage to people. But the thing that's weird about that is that like, okay, but Jonas is in charge now. So like, are we still supposed to not, I don't know. What do you want from us, Lois? Like, how should we feel about this?
Yeah, I do think it's less obvious. It's more complex than the first two books in that, like, I don't understand, like, it's less explicitly like they're doing it wrong. You know, it's like,
yeah.
Okay, I found the line, and I think the reason you missed it is because it's really early, so it's like before we even get formally introduced to Leader, and we, as the reader, figure out who he is, and also probably before you realized who Maddie was too. So you were just like, I'm just reading a book. But on page 20, it says, in the schoolhouse, Mentor, the school teacher, gently tutored a mischievous 8-year-old named Gabe, who had neglected his studies to play and now needed help. So there's just like a, yeah. He gets a little cameo.
Thank you for finding that. I'm glad Gabe is alive and well. The other thing, sorry, this is like the most rambly answer to your question ever.
I love it. This is exactly how I expected this live show to go because this book is so messy.
It is. It really is. So I also I appreciate the way that one of the issues with this community, it's like, and we see the way that Jonas reacts when they're basically voting to like close their borders and to not take in refugees, which also very topical right now. Yeah. Wish it wasn't so relevant. But like we see that Jonas can't really do anything about that because he's like, you know, part of letting people decide for themselves is like they sometimes choose really bad things. And unfortunately, that's how like democracy works sometimes is people vote against their own interests and against the interests of other people. And like I appreciate that And I think the whole theme about like taking in other people and like having a responsibility for that, I love that. I thought that was beautiful. I love the way that came through in the book. And like I was saying, I think that that could maybe explain why this community also doesn't feel quite right, is because it's like, well, if you're not going to be like a dictator, then people are sometimes going to choose bad things.
Mm-hmm.
But if that were the case, I think that should have been more explicit, or more like a part of the story. And I also think that if that were the case, like leaders' decisions, I think should have been maybe characterized differently. Like I just really can't get past the name thing. I don't know why that is like such a, I guess because the books are so fixated on like language and the power of having
Yeah.
language, like knowledge. And so then it's like, what do you mean Jonas would, like, no, he wouldn't. My boy would never.
Yeah. It is also just, I mean, it's like a weird convention, anyways. Like, it would be one thing if he was like, and I give everyone in the community a title to represent
Yeah.
like their gift and what they're, you know, skilled at. But instead, it's like, this is your name. Your name is now like a descriptor of you, which is
This
like
is your
so weird.
identity. Yeah. Well, and in some of them, like, so for mentor, for example, that at least has like connotations of like more meaning, you know, it's not just like a letter, like his name isn't teacher, you know,
Yeah.
it's mentor.
Yeah, I
But
love
then
that
there's,
his name was Mentor, actually. I'm like, that's like so
yeah,
much
that's
better than teacher,
cool.
like you
And
said.
that has a little something extra. But then there's like a lot of names that it's like stock tender. It's like he tends the stock. That's all he does. Like,
Yeah.
that's who he is as a person. That's why he's on this earth. Like,
Brutal.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely I think a weird and bold way to carry on the story of the first two books, in my opinion. And also, I have a bullet point that just says timeline hurts my head because, like, it. I tried not to actively think about it too much because it was very confusing to me trying to imagine. Because if we're to take the ending of The Giver for what it is and be like, he did sled down a hill, because that's what they say is canon, it's not a metaphor, and he
Yeah.
did find this village of people singing. They do sing, there are people who are living in this village. Like, when did he become the leader of this village? He's still very young. Like,
Yeah.
it feels wild that they'd be like, 20-year-old boy, get over here and
Yeah.
lead us. So, like, I don't know what kind of incredible things he did, but
Yeah, like I wonder, it could be connected to the like seeing beyond thing he
Mhm.
does, like the magic again. Um yeah. Also, that did remind me as like one thing, like as frustrating as parts of this book were, I am very grateful it exists, because I'm very happy to know that Gabriel and Jonas did not in fact die of hypothermia
Yes.
and hallucinate their last moments of peace. I'm really glad that wasn't where we ended. So as much as I'm gonna bitch about the other things in this book, I'm like, at least they're alive.
I know.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lois Lowry.
Yeah, my because I think I had told you that I've read this book only once before, so I really remembered so little about it. I was like, I remember there is another village. I remember that there was a leader, but for some reason in my mind, the leader was like grown up Gabriel, which, give me that story, honestly. I would love to read it. But I was mistaken. And I think that's literally all I could remember. I was like, that's it. Like, I didn't remember the healing. I didn't remember the ending. I didn't remember like Kira's dad. I didn't remember a dang thing. So it was definitely interesting diving into this and being like, wow, she's throwing a lot out there for such a short story. And not only is it its own story, but she's also throwing in all these Easter eggs and tie-ins from the other two books. So
yeah,
it's
I
like,
mean, the main character is somebody that we meet in the previous one.
mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was really funny. Like, I'm picturing Lois Lowry throwing in that detail about Thomas getting married. She's like, stop shipping him with Kira.
She did it for me, that jerk. She was like, knock it off. But then
Stop.
she's like, but ship Kira with Jonas. And I'm like,
I know.
okay.
know.
I'll
That
hear
was
you
very
out.
clearly the way we were supposed to go.
Yeah, sorry, Lois. You didn't make it as obvious. She didn't know Jonas then, okay? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk a little bit about setting because ooh boy, that village, or should I say village, since we don't like to use articles apparently.
Yeah. Which, okay, that's another thing that I'm like, this feels still more dystopian than not. It's like we live in village. Like
Yeah. Don't
is
go in
own.
forest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a very weird choice that
Maybe,
I don't
maybe
understand.
Jonas just like needs a better PR guy. I don't know. Like, or somebody to just like literally name things so he doesn't sound like a dictator.
So weird.
Yeah.
But so I'm very intrigued by the setting of Village, especially obviously comparing it to the previous communities. Again, we cannot escape these other two books in this live show because they're
Yeah.
so interconnected. But what I really especially enjoy about like this third book is that Lois shows us that even in a quote unquote ideal community, like you can still face corruption. There can still
Mm-hmm.
be, people who disagree with, what the place was founded upon. And they're like, no, we want to change that. And so that's really prominent. And I wish it was even more prominent
Yeah.
in the narrative. Um, we see that both with like the issue of like immigration and people coming in, mostly especially that, but also the trading and
Yeah.
the magical shenanigans that are occurring because of that. And I also think it's really interesting too that there's like sometimes more obvious than others, but I like that all of the different settings of this series, I feel like each community kind of ties into these different real world issues and she kind of hones in on just a few. So like, in the Giver, we had like, okay, equal equity. We want everything to be the same for everyone. And like low key also like eugenics, like I mean, not to say low key, but it's like that was in there, like really serious. And then Gathering Blue obviously had a sort of a similar vibe too as the latter, with the ableism issues, and then also like had oh no,
Oh
where
no.
where have I gone? It looks like your camera was unplugged. Well, it's attached to my laptop, so I
Why
guarantee it
why did
isn't.
he try and it's like don't lie to me. Just say you
Like,
don't know what happened, computer. Like
oh my God. Okay. And the thing is, I know the moment I try to turn my camera on, it's going to mute me. So hold on one second.
while Julia gets that back up and running, I also do want to mention. So obviously, we're going to be finishing the Giver series next month, and Julia and I are also then going to be reading and discussing um, four more books that are like not part of a series. So that's sort of the way that we've been doing our I don't know. I almost feel like it's an exchange of recommendations. So I am going to be doing a very short video announcement talking about what those four books are going to be. That should be going up actually very soon, so that you guys have plenty of time if you are interested in reading along with some of those or all of those. Yeah, we're really excited about them, and it's going to be the same as this series live show, where two of them I'm going to host and lead the discussion, and 2 of them Julia is. And so with the Giver series, Julia had read that before, obviously, and I hadn't. And these next 4 books, which should take us pretty much through the end of the year, are going to be ones that I have read and Julia has not. So it's going to be, I think, really, really good. I'm very excited about the ones that we've picked. And it's going to be great to get to reread those and just like really analyze them deeply. So that is sort of what is coming up next for us. And we can't wait. So let's see. Okay, Julia is just gonna restart her computer very quickly. I think, wasn't it last time I had to do that? Our internet is just really not wanting us to do this read along. So in the meantime, let me see if there was anything that we were going to discuss regarding like scheduling or anything. Like I said, we're going to be doing, I'll have the announcement up for our next 4 selections. And then after that, I also haven't like done the announcement for the 2025 picks. That's still sort of in the planning stage, but hello, Julia.
Now everything is like, let's reopen. And I'm like, please, like this one tab. Okay. Well, thank you for occupying the time talking about.
Well, it was a good opportunity to like mention what our next few months are going to look like. So
yeah. Okay. Oh boy. Where were we? We were talking about the previous communities.
And you were talking about how the different books sort of have like a different issue that they're focused on, and
yes. Okay. So yeah, Messenger. Obviously, we have the plot line with immigration, which, like I was saying, I wish they had kind of leaned into more, because I thought that one chapter with the mom that Maddie meets for like 2 scenes, I thought it was so moving. Like I cried. And then I was like, this is barely part of the book. Like really, it's just a catalyst to get Kira. So
yeah,
that was kind of annoying.
And I think it would have been such a great opportunity to talk about how people who are themselves like helped and rescued from things, how a lot of times people respond with giving compassion to others, but sometimes it's the opposite. Like one of the things that it made me think about is like how when you're in like elementary school in the US and it's like, and the Puritans came here because they were religiously persecuted, and then it's like you learn immediately it's like, and then they did that to everyone else. So I think that, like you were saying, if the like immigration and xenophobia was more of a like main focus of the story, I think that would have been such a good opportunity to talk about how like you can't just turn away from people once you've gotten the help that you needed. I'm sorry, I think I cut you off when you were going to be saying something. I got excited about what you were saying.
That was excellent input. I'm glad. Interrupt me whenever you feel like it. This is a conversation, not a presentation. So thank you. And then I think too, because you were kind of talking about like the forest. I was going to say forest, and I was like, just say the forest. The forest and like the magical things that are happening there. I feel like there could have been like some sort of like environmentalism thing going on that wasn't really explored.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And I just keep thinking about how if the supernatural element had been more in line with the other 2 books, I just think that would have worked a lot better. Like, so the thing when they're talking about the forest giving people a sign when like they can't travel safely anymore, like a warning. I thought that was super interesting, and I was sort of interpreting that as like, and I'm not saying that it isn't real. I'm saying that it wouldn't be something as like blatantly obvious as like there's a vine that just like stabbed you in the foot. Like, you know what I mean? I was
Yeah.
thinking of it as something where like, oh, you always are able to like balance when you're crossing the rivers, and this time you didn't. You fell in. And so that is like a warning. Like, I think that would have been way more subtle, and it would have like fit the vibe of the other books more. And then
Yeah.
the other thing about that, which you said we're in spoiler territory, right?
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So the other thing with the trading, I thought like that is so creepy and that is so well done, because you know, again, this is what Lois Lowry is doing in this series, is like things are not right, and
Yeah.
I have predictions about what's going on, but I do not know for sure, and the uncertainty is very creepy in the best way. So that was great, and all of that like tension, and how even though Maddie is not as like worried about it initially as Seer is, he's still like uncomfy about it. Um, so I kept thinking that we were going to get more details about the trading that kind of blurred the line of like, is this supernatural or not? Because when they're talking about how, like, the first time we see Mentor go up, he's apparently already traded before, but like the first time we see him do it, and it's pretty clear that it's about getting with this other woman,
Mm-hmm.
who apparently is a widow, which I'm like, that is also very suspicious, but okay. Um,
Totally.
yeah, so like the first time that we see him doing that, I was thinking, okay, so he has made a trade wanting to get the affection of this other person. I was thinking that the trader was like killing people, or like was, you know,
Mm.
was doing like things in the physical world that
Yeah.
are really evil and that are like leading to these outcomes. But
Sure.
it's straight up magic. It's like
Yeah.
you're making a deal with like a a fae or like a beast or something. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just,
And he's like, you won't be bald anymore. Like,
yeah. And I'm like, that just seems like, why would we do it that way? Like, why not have, and because I would also fit in a lot better with like this idea of like, oh, humans are the real monsters, you know, because like,
mm,
I don't know. I feel like I'm not explaining this super well, but
yeah. Yeah. I do want to talk about the tradesman more right now and that whole plot point, because it is very mind-boggling to me,
it felt like it
both
was
because
from a different book.
it could have been so good, but I
Yeah.
feel like it was like underutilized and like weirdly handled.
Like under explained. Like, I think that it was so entirely separate from everything that was
Yeah,
happening with the forest that I'm like, why wasn't this just like a separate story? Or if
right.
it was going to be connected, then actually connect them and make the book longer. Like,
Hmm.
so,
Right, yeah, like, is the tradesman the one who's trying to keep people from, like, coming and going because that gives him more power? Like, we
mm-hmm,
needed something
mm-hmm.
there that was, like, tying those 2 together, because they just felt like 2 different conflicts, and honestly, I feel like the trading doesn't get a full resolution either.
No, and we still don't even know like where this guy came from. Is he even a human?
Yeah,
Like,
where did his power come from? Like,
what
why
is
does
he?
everyone else with magic have like a nifty, helpful little gift? And he's like, well, I can do anything as long as you trade me something. Like,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know. Very nefarious, very weird.
yeah. I think
Uh,
the word that I just was thinking of is like the other two books feel very grounded. Like, even
mhm.
though it is obviously dystopian and like they're, you know, a lot of things are different, it's not even necessarily like, I don't know, science fiction in the sense that like it's something that we could see happening like immediately, although some parts of it are, but it's like they felt real. They felt
Mhm.
like, again, very grounded. And then with this third book, that wasn't the case. And I think it really does undercut the effectiveness and the emotional power of the story.
Yeah, that's 100% accurate to me, because it's like the other books, even though their ties to like current life and things that we have, like, felt sort of like, okay, like I could envision an you know, a dystopian future where our world could turn into that world, but there weren't really like any obvious ties. And yet in this book, she's like, how about a pinball machine? Shall I
Yes.
reference Shakespeare? And I'm like, oh, okay, so this is our world.
Yeah, that was so weird to me. That was
Yeah.
so weird.
And
And
yet, like you said, it felt the least grounded, which is so bizarre.
yeah. And like with the other books where like we talked about some of the specifics of how it doesn't come right out and say exactly, like you can kind of make educated guesses, like when they're talking about like the worship object, you know, and how
Mhm.
they meet in this like building that was important in the past, like they're meeting in a church, but the like Lois Lowry doesn't have to explain that to the reader, like we know, but by not like outright saying it, it sort of lets the story be its own thing.
Yeah.
And then we get here, and yeah, it's like a pinball machine, and I'm like, a what? And it gives you candy. I'm like, what? Like,
Excuse me?
it's just, yeah, it was very like just a very odd choice, and I'm like,
Mhm.
there has to be some reason that she wanted to do that, but I don't know what it is. Like, it just feels jarring, and not in a way that's like intentional.
Yeah.
um yeah.
It's also the trading, going back to the trading. It's like, I don't want to say perplexing because I know there are people in in the world um, that, you know, do things out of selfish motivations and, you know, etc. But it's like wild to me that that large a percentage of a village would willingly go to the tradesmen and be like, I want a thing. Doesn't matter. If I become rude and cranky, so be it. If my children get sick, oh well. Like you're draining the life out of your children for a gaming machine? That's
I
crazy.
I could not get over, like, because I thought too, I was like, that is very clearly being implied here,
Yeah.
that whatever, however this trading works, that their mother, and I guess father too, I don't know how that would work, but it's like, yeah, literally trading away the health and implied life of your children for this little pinball machine. Like, yeah, that's just, and that's another thing that, like, because it was supernatural, it wasn't as meaningful, because like I think if that hadn't been like, if it hadn't been like just magic,
Hmm.
then it could have been a really interesting look at how, like, and I think this is something that they've even found like in psychology in the real world, but it's like actions are contagious, you know, sometimes, like, and that's true in like good and bad ways, you know, like they talk about mob mentality, but
Yeah.
also with like selflessness, and like those things are also contagious. They inspire other people, and that's something that humans have been doing since we've been humans. Like,
Mhm.
so I think that if the magic thing weren't part of this, it could have been a really interesting look at how like a community that starts like turning away from its values, that can spread, but instead it's just like, oh, you got cursed with the bad magic, you know. And also
Yeah.
that to me also doesn't give these characters responsibility for their choices, because if it's literal magic, then it's like, so I guess we can't blame them, but some people are not trading,
Well,
so there is some kind of
yeah, like to what degree do they understand the trades? Because obviously,
yeah,
like he's called the tradesman, they call it trading. So that heavily implies they know I'm going to get something in exchange for something else. But do they, like, will he be like, okay, yeah, you can get XYZ. This is what you're going to give? Like, are, you know, like, do they have awareness of what they'll have to give up? Or I
right,
guess the severity of the sacrifice they're making.
yeah, like I wonder if like one of the main ideas that we're supposed to take from this book is sort of like greed, and like continuing to want more when you don't need it, or when like you already, like, you're happy
Mhm.
already, but you're like, well, somebody has something I don't have, and even though before I knew that I didn't care, now I really need that. Like,
Yeah,
but if that were the case, I still don't think we needed to do it this way. It's just, it's muddled.
it is muddled. That's a good word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the more I think about it, the more I'm like, why?
Yeah, it's like, what even, especially because like the trading thing, that whole plot line is in itself like not, you know, not connected to the other things going on in the book. It's a very engaging plot line.
Yeah.
It could have been very effective and very interesting. And it's almost like a waste of a good like antagonist, because it was so creepy, and
Oh,
it reminded
stupid.
me like very much of the other two books, of how like you have that building unease, and obviously like as adults we pick up on clues like quicker, but it's like you
Mhm.
still have that sense of like, I know things are not right, but I don't know exactly how they are not right, and so you're sort
Right.
of waiting on pins and needles the whole time, and that is so good. Like I love that. I love the
Hmm.
way Lois Lowry like capitalizes on that feeling, and then she hits you with like the emotions and the themes.
Hmm.
And we could have done that in this book, and we didn't. We just had like two entirely separate creepy things happening that didn't actually connect to what I think the story was saying. Like,
Yeah.
like we've been saying with the trading, I guess it sort of connects because of, you know, greed and wanting to hoard resources, and how that connects to not taking care of refugees. Like, I guess that sort of relates, but not in the same way that the other books did.
Yeah. But I would argue that the refugees and the trading are two like interwoven plot points, whereas neither truly connects to the forest. That's just like
Mm,
peripheral. So it's
yeah.
still not amazing. And okay, so I get that she wanted the whole trading thing because they had, again, a lot of references to sacrifice
Mhm,
and
mhm.
I'm truly, I'm going to skip some bullet points just because the conversation is already leading us to the ending. So we're just going to talk about the ending. And then we'll go back and talk about some other things that I actually like more. So that'll be a positive way to end, I guess. Um, and so I get that. But I also think it's a messy metaphor, anyways, because there are things in life that you can trade and trade back. Like some sacrifices are not permanent. Like it's
Yeah.
weird. It's weird to be like, well, once you've given something up, you can never get it again. It's like, but sometimes I can. So,
Yeah.
like, what an
And
extreme metaphor.
and also it doesn't really fit with the character arc of the other protagonists, because like Jonas and Kira grow up in communities, and even like Maddie as well, like in
Hmm.
before he comes to village,
Yeah.
they grow up in communities that are this is such an understatement, but that are bad. You know, they do
Yeah.
bad things. And so they have grown up surrounded by these rules and these values that hurt people, and that are are detrimental to everybody in the community.
Hmm.
But even though that is true, even though they have like, you know, they've grown up like nurture versus nature, it's like they've been nurtured by this environment that is so harmful, they still can make a choice to be like, actually no, this is not right, and I'm going to keep learning more about, until I can understand it and do something about it. So like the idea of every sacrifice, every trade is permanent, it's like that almost to me suggests that like you're either a good person or a bad person, and that there's never any in between, there's never any growth from
Like it's
people.
too black and white.
And I just don't like that. Yeah, and I also, and this is like for sure in major spoiler territory, I don't like that Maddie is not able to like authentically make the choice to sacrifice. Like
Hmm.
that it just happens. And like I think he would have. He has like so much love to give.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I really got emotionally attached to Maddie here. Um so I think that he probably almost certainly would have done it if he knew. But it bothers me so much that he does not get to make that choice. And also
Hmm.
like, sorry, I'm getting like way
Well,
off.
I'm already getting misty eyed. I'm with you. We're talking about the end. So,
Yeah, like way off in the weeds here, but like it's, I don't know if this is supposed to be a sort of like tangential like religious metaphor. I don't know. But if it was, it's not a good one
yeah.
because if this is supposed to mimic, for example, like the crucifixion of Jesus, like it doesn't work as a comparison because Jesus did choose. Like, that's like the whole point.
Yes.
Is that it was intentional. It wasn't an accident. And so like and I don't know if she was trying to like draw that parallel, but if she was, it was not very well done. Like it just doesn't
I
work.
love that you're just like, you don't even have my bullet points in front of you and you're still like, let's talk about this. Cause like same, I was like, is this like a poorly done religious allegory or like what's the deal? Because like if we think about theoretically with the other two books, the theme of sacrifice still makes sense and works, okay? Because Jonas sacrificed his place in his community in order to help them grow. So he left and had to start from scratch, but he knew it was going to be for the betterment of all of them.
Yeah.
Kira had to sacrifice being with her dad and her family in order to stay and help her community. So kind of like the opposite of Jonas in a sense. But Maddie has to give up his whole life. Like that, honestly, it like really upsets me. And I do agree with you that I think if he was given the choice, he would.
Right. But he wasn't given it. Like it bothers me so much that and this is what I was saying at the beginning, when I was trying not to be as like explicitly spoilery. But like I understand why on like a technical writing level you would be like, well, you know, if one person is going to heal the whole forest and literally every other bad thing, I guess, in this community, like yeah, you would probably have to have like it wouldn't feel earned if there wasn't a cost. So I get that. But why did the cost have to be Maddie's life? Why did the cost be like why did it have to be something that happened to him instead of him? Like he was like practically unconscious. Like he falls on the ground. I'm getting very heated.
No, I'm glad you are.
He like collapses on the ground and dies. And it's like we do get like that line about like, oh, he feels at peace and he lets go. Like that's like that is supposed to be, I guess, him making the choice. But it just it's like he was like raised for slaughter. And I hate it.
Okay, because that's the other thing I wanted to talk about with the magic that like actually it gets me heated too. Hello. As I hit things.
We're like so upset with
because okay, so why is it? And again, this kind of goes back into the characterization of Jonas as leader, where I'm like, I don't truly feel like you're entirely the same character to me.
Right.
Where like Jonas and Kira, and I guess Thomas too, like have this magic that comes to them from time to time and or can be used like in a moment when they need it. Like, you know, when Kira's like, hold on, let me see if we can make it out of the forest. I'll grab my needle real quick. Like those kind of things. Whereas Maddie's magic has to be saved. Jonas is like, don't use it. You're going to use it up. It's like, why does he have a finite reserve of magic?
Yeah.
And the fact that he's telling him don't use it yet, again, kind of feels like what you said, where it's like, it feels like he was raised for the slaughter.
Yeah. And it also, like, when Maddie is like, I want to go to my friend Ramon and help him. Like, he's really sick. This is like really, and like he wants to, and he's like, well, I can't because I can't use up that gift. And like that doesn't fit in with like the themes of like compassion. Also, it's just really random, just came to me. Have you seen the movie Twitches? I promise this is relevant.
Yeah.
Okay. So I always get like deep in my like sibling feels at the end of that movie. And I think about this line, like, honestly, a lot, where, like, at the end, because, of course, it's, like, their love for each other as sisters that saves them. And the line that's, like, love, you can always make more of it when you need it. Like, that is, like, the only thing that you get more when you give away. And that, to me, would make so much more sense than, like, Maddie having to save his reserves. Like, it's, like, a non-renewable resource, you know, like it really, I don't like it. There's a lot of things about the ending and how that happens and I'm like, I do not enjoy this. No, I do not accept this.
And it is just, I mean, like sloppily done in that, again, like you were saying, like he thinks about like, oh, I could use my power to go save Ramon. Oh, but I'll probably need it later. And it's like, that's your friend who's dying.
Yeah. And like how much more of an effective ending and like, you know, tying into the themes would it be if like he had thought about, you know, he's like, well, you know, I'm not supposed to waste it. Like I'm not supposed to just like use it up. And then he's like, but it's not wasting it to use it to
Hmm.
help somebody. And so
Right.
he does help Ramon, and somehow that is the thing that makes the sacrifice work, or that makes like
Right.
the healing work. And maybe he doesn't even have to be sacrificed. Like I don't
Right.
know. Just there were so many ways that I feel like similar, like almost the same thing could have happened, and if it were just told differently it would have worked so much better.
Hmm.
um
Yeah.
yeah.
And like you were saying about the um like the size issue of like that's a lot of wrong to heal for one person. It's like I almost would have loved to see all of this magic accumulate, right? Because we've gotten little bits of it now. So it's like, what if the seeing and the creating and the healing like could all come together to heal the forest? Like that would have been really impactful for me
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. Or even like if it was something where, you know, Maddie does start to heal it, and consciously
Mhm.
he's conscious and he's making the choice.
Important.
And he does start to like heal the forest or heal the village, and he realizes like, oh, it's not going to be enough. Like I am just one person, I don't know how I can do this.
Yeah.
And then we sort of pull back as like the reader, and we see moments of other people doing things that heal. Like, you know, like we see like in the village community, we see people who are maybe like sneaking in people who need help, and they're, you know, like that would have been such a good opportunity that would
Hmm.
also, I think, highlight one of the other things that I have loved about the other books, which is that like even though we focus on a particular main character who is like the hero, they're the main person who's going to fix something, it
Hmm.
always gives you the feeling that this could be other people. This could be anybody. Like, yes, Jonas has sort of an extra like boost, and Kira has like that extra boost of like her magic and of sort of having that little bit of suspicion about the way things are currently working. So like they have that advantage, but there are other good people. There are other people who are involved. And so how cool would that be if that is what heals everything, is that you can't just have one person like throw it all away.
Yeah. Oh, Lois, take it back to the drawing board. We have some really good ideas for you.
We have some notes for you. Yeah.
If you want to just rewrite and republish Messenger, I think it could be top
Yeah.
notch.
It could be like what, like director's cut or like editor's
Yeah,
cut or something.
but not a genre cut.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Oh man.
Yeah, I do almost even feel like, and this isn't again entirely about the ending, but I think one thing that feels so different, weirdly, it shouldn't, from Messenger to the other two books is that, like, I think in The Giver and Gathering Blue, we get like one prominent figure in each book, a little bit more in Gathering Blue, but who is like this like force of good and change who really helps like to shape our main character. And the rest of society, there may be like one or two people who are like bad, but everyone's pretty just like ambivalent, like this is the
Yeah,
way things are. It feels like in Village everyone except for Seer and Maddie and Leader are so shady. I'm like, why
yeah,
are you all so like dark and
yeah. And
creepy?
this goes back to what you were saying about like how bizarre it is that because of this trading thing, like suddenly everybody is willing to do it. Like it's not even like once you've made the trade, because I guess then you could argue that that like changes you,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure it does.
Hmm.
But it's like the fact that all of these people who we are told how compassionate they are, how good they are, like the fact that, you know, that one of these, I think it was one of the women was like, she was always the first person to like welcome the newcomers. And now she's like one of the people leading the charge for like, we've done enough. We don't want to help anybody else. It's like we know that there were so many good people, and so it is so weird that like this traitor shows up, and now all of a sudden everybody is selfish, everybody is bad, and like just waiting for the opportunity to do something like that.
Yeah.
Like, very weird, very weird.
Ugh, messy. I'm like going back to my bullet points. I'm like, what did we skip over that we need to talk
Yeah.
about? Okay, wait. Okay, here's a good one, a positive,
Good,
so we
good.
don't have to complain a little bit. But again, ties back into the other books, as as she is wont to do, our Lois. Actually really loved the continuation of the theme of knowledge is power.
Yes.
Yeah. And in this book, it's interesting because they emphasize it's not only the importance of history, whether it's like general world history or like personal community history, but also stories and literature, which was great.
The
So,
little Shakespeare
yeah,
quote. Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
moment
And
to make us go.
I thought that was so cool. And it was funny because when Leader is mentioning, like, oh, yeah, I got this like massive barge of books. And I'm like, that's weird and random. And then like they explain more, and I'm like, oh, wait, like, so his community was like, they sent those to him. And I'm like, that is actually a really beautiful like sign that things are changing back home
Mhm.
and that they are. So I'm like, actually, I like that. Like, on
Yeah,
second thought, that's good. Like,
it's a good one. Yeah.
yeah,
And I like that they showed that for Kira and her community as well. Like when she goes back and Maddie's like boasting, he's like, I can read Shakespeare now. She's like, me too. And I'm like, you can read. Yay.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it was nice that we got those little glimpses of like, their sacrifices had impact and were meaningful and things are changing for the better. Because I do think that really resonates with the hopeful themes in those stories.
yeah,
Um, so love that. Do we want to talk about just Maddie in general?
yeah.
Baby boy.
Um,
See, now you know why when you were like, I didn't care for him that much in Gathering Blue. I'm like, no, he's a precious little
you're like,
kid.
just wait, just wait. I know. When we get to quotes, I think like almost all of mine are like things that Maddie says or thinks, which like I know that he's the narrator, so that makes sense. But like specifically about him as a person,
Mhm.
yeah, I love him. Like, and I think it is really beautiful that we see like because Jonas and Kira are much more like obviously nice and likable, at the beginning. And like we were talking about, they have sort of internalized these like really bad things of their community, but we see from the beginning that like they are generous, they do think about other people. Maddie doesn't. He hasn't really been able to. That's like a luxury for him that he's
Mhm.
just trying to survive. Which makes it extra upsetting that he doesn't, but it's fine. um so I really like that he is such a different main character, and we're seeing him at a point in his arc where it's like we know about the like sort of unlikable stuff,
Yeah.
or unlikable, that's kind of unfair, but like less
He's rough
obviously,
around the edges.
yeah, exactly, less obviously hero material, like we already know about that. And so by this time it's like he has adjusted to living in this new community, but he still has that memory of what things were like. And I feel like that, I don't know if we're explicitly told this or like given this connection, but I feel like that has to inform how he views like compassion and like responsibility to other people.
Mhm.
Because I think we get a line about like how almost like the community has like forgotten how bad things were, because like now they're fine, and so they're like, well, why should I have to take care of other people if
Yeah.
I'm doing okay? And Maddie is one of the people who's like, well, I remember. Like, I understand what it's like
Mhm.
to be alone and to be fending for yourself. And so
Yeah.
that sort of gives him, I think, more empathy, because he is more mindful of how rare it is in this society to have people looking out for you.
It almost is like a really great parallel to like real world politics when you see like no offense, but like old selfish people who are like, well, I like this policy because it looks out for XYZ. And then all of the youth and the youngest generation is like, just be kind, take care of other people. Like they
Yeah,
see it so much less selfishly.
yeah.
Like that's so
No,
Maddie.
I agree. And there were quite a few things in this book specifically that felt very applicable to like current politics and
Mhm.
um yeah, I mean even like what we were talking about earlier, one of the biggest ones for me was like Jonas basically being like they are doing something wrong, but having a democracy means that I can't just be like actually no, you can't vote that. Like
Mhm.
um yeah.
Yeah. And that scene is so painful because it's like you can feel that he's like doing everything. He's like, we'll have a debate, we'll vote on it. And it's like not enough.
Yeah.
And then like,
Also, sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, go ahead. I was just gonna say like Maddie and Jonas both like as they're leaving the scene, like you like the descriptions of how like they
Yes.
feel things have changed and they like he's like, I've never seen leader more sad. Like,
Yeah.
ugh.
Yeah. And again with like the subtlety of language, because like she doesn't outright tell us they lost the vote, but we
Yeah.
know because of how like the emotions are characterized. The other thing, like as you were talking, that I just like thought of too, going back to how like I just keep complaining about like why is there magic? There doesn't need to be magic. I think it would be so much more effective and have so much more like to say about society if the like helplessness and like the losing the argument and the discussion, if it weren't connected to people like literally having their empathy cursed out of them, I don't know. Like
Mhm.
I think that would have been a lot more helpful
Yeah.
in terms of like the story and yeah.
Right. Well, it could have just as easily been like these are the people who were earliest to get to the village and have become complacent. And now that they're comfortable, they're like, I want more comforts. I want these nice worldly possessions. And I don't really care if more people come in because then they're just going to take my nice stuff. Like
Yeah.
that sort of idea, I think, would have lent itself more to the like real world versus they're selling away their kindness.
Right.
And
Like
that's bonkers anyways because like if I went out to Target after this live show and I was like, I want a cute new pillow for my house, like am I giving away a part of my like goodness, my inherent
humanity.
goodness because I want a cute pillow? No.
Yeah. And it's not even something because like you could understand it more if it were um like when I was thinking, I was like, wait, so did Mentor like low key wish for Stock Tender to die so that he could get with the wife?
Which would be
Like
so dark.
yeah. And I was wondering if that's maybe what we were supposed to think. And in that case, I could absolutely understand why the trade would be for like your goodness, your empathy. Like that
Mhm.
even would make more sense to me than the fact that, like, oh, yeah, whether you wish for, I don't know, I'm trying to think of one of the not so great things that people wished for, but it's like, even if it's like a little pinball machine or if it's like a murder, you give up the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
weird. Um, Also, I did want to. This is one of the things that I liked going back to something that was really good. One of the things that I marked, and this is one of those classic, like it's not even like a quote in the sense that it is like beautifully written or very like interesting in the way it's written. It's just like such a powerful like moment, and the way that she like the point that she chooses to use this line at, so good. It's when they're doing the debate. And so they have all the things that the crowd is saying, like, we need all the fish for ourselves. Our school is not big enough to teach their children too, only our own. And it's all those like classic things where it's like,
Mhm.
I'm not a bad person. I just, we don't have the resources. We
We're
don't have
looking out for ourselves.
exactly. So the thing that I marked and that I think is so smart and powerful that she ended with this is, and finally, we've done it long enough. I keep thinking about that because I think that is such a like brilliant like highlighting of why this behavior is so like obviously it's unethical, but it's also like infuriating because it's like you can't like humanity and empathy and compassion, like I'm sorry, but it's an ongoing thing. Like, you don't get to bank it for later. You can't be like, well, I've helped enough people. I've helped some people. Like, that means I can take the rest of my life off and do whatever I want. Like, that is not how it works. And I
Mm-hmm.
really love that that is sort of slipped in there. Like, because it's such a stupid argument. Like, if you even like think about it at all, it like doesn't make logical sense. It's
Yeah.
like I saw somebody describe actually voting this way as like it's like feeding a baby. You're not like, well, I fed the baby yesterday, I don't need to today. It's like, that's no, it's an ongoing
Mm-hmm.
thing. So anyway, whatever we were talking about just reminded me of that quote in the book, so I
Oh,
wanted to like jump on that. But
no,
I
that is a great moment.
there's so many moments like that where it's like, why can't those be more like consistent?
Yeah. Um, did you, before we kind of like go into quotes, do you have anything else in specific that you want to kind of talk about? I feel like obviously we were kind of all over the place, but we hit all the big things that I had on my list. So I don't, oh, actually, you know what? Let's talk about Seer because I loved so much like Maddie being this adopted son. It like made me cry on multiple occasions.
Okay, this is sort of also cheating and getting into quotes, but
Yeah, yeah.
the part where he's like, both my children, and I'm like, oh my
And I'm sobbing. Yeah, I remember.
god. Yeah,
Yeah,
I really I had so much more attachment to him here than as Kira's dad, which I guess makes sense. We don't see him very much in
yeah.
Gathering Blue, but
And he doesn't know Kira really as a child. So it's like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, even though you're her dad, it's like you didn't raise her the way he is doing with Maddie. So,
yeah. Um Also, so question for you. Do you think that the forest of this book,
mhm.
do you think it is the same forest as like in Gathering Blue when they talk about like, oh, people die there, there's like wild animals there, like, and then it's like there are no wild like
Yeah,
is
no beasts.
yeah, yeah, like is that supposed to be a literal like this is the same place? Or I mean, they make it sound like the villages are pretty far apart, so I guess it could be
Mhm.
like a forest that eventually turns into another forest. But
Right. Yeah, I do imagine that between Kira's village and this village, there's like forest and woods connecting them, but I picture like
more
miles and
orderly.
miles and miles and miles of
Okay,
forest.
okay.
Yeah.
Because it would be kind of interesting if it's like, because the way they talk about the woods in Gathering Blue, it does seem almost supernatural, and then we
Yeah.
kind of find out like, oh, it's one person is murdering people, or like a few people are. But it would be interesting if that was like sort of a callback to, like if this book were sort of a callback to like how dangerous the forest is supposed to be.
Mm,
Um, yeah.
that is a good
Um,
thought. That's intriguing.
Other than that, I think we covered a lot of the specific things. Uh, yeah,
Shall we look at quotes?
let's do it.
Oh boy, where to start?
What'd you say?
I said, oh boy, where to start?
I know. I didn't have as many for this one, but like,
Yeah, a lot of my tabs are more like thematic things, like once they start
yes,
talking about sacrifice or like little parallels between Kira and Jonas and Maddie, like even on the first page. I mean, it's not like a quote, but like he wished he were grown so he could decide when to eat and whether to bother eating at all. There was something he needed to do, a thing that scared him. Waiting just made it worse. And like that sort of like that feels very very Jonas.
yeah. The first one I had, this is classic. Like, and I only have two tab colors. Green is Maddie. Just like specifically character things about him.
Hmm.
Um, when he's talking to Ramon, and Ramon's like, "Oh, I could come with you." He says, "No." Maddie replied quickly, "I have to go alone." "Oh, it's for a message?" It wasn't, but Maddie nodded. It bothered him a little to lie about small things, but he always had. He had grown up lying. and he still found it strange that the people in this place where he now lived thought lying was wrong. To Maddie, it was sometimes a way of making things easier, more comfortable, more convenient. Like, and that also makes me think about Jonas and like how like very differently they feel about lying. And it's like, of course Maddie feels this way. He's doing his best. Like, he's kind of right.
Like, and you know what? I forgot to say this. I do love the fact that even though she leaned into it a little too heavily for our preferences, with the healing magic, that tied back to him healing Branch's tail in Gathering Blue. Like, it makes me really emotional to think about. Actually.
And then like anybody else would have just given up, but he was like, no, I can save him.
Yeah. Precious boy. I actually also have a little passage that's about like secrets, which feels like, akin to lying. There were no secrets in Village. It was one of the rules that Leader had proposed, and all of the people had voted in favor of it. Everyone who had come to Village from elsewhere, all of those who had not been born here, had come from places with secrets.
Yes.
Sometimes, not very often, for inevitably it caused sadness, people described their places of origin, places with cruel governments, harsh punishments, desperate poverty, or false comforts. There were so many such places. Sometimes hearing the stories, remembering his own childhood, Maddie was astounded. At first, having found his way to Village, he had thought his own brutal beginnings, a fatherless hovel for a home, a grim, defeated mother who beat him and his brother bloody, were unusual. Now he knew that there were communities everywhere, sprinkled across the vast landscape of the known world in which people suffered, not always from beatings and hunger the way he had, but from ignorance, from not knowing, from being kept from knowledge.
I marked that last part as well. My other tab color was about knowledge.
Yeah, look at us.
Yeah, and even I didn't even like quote or like mark this part as a quote, but like even later on that page when Maddie's remembering how his punishment for something was no lessons. And it seemed to Maddie then a laughable punishment. Who wanted to go to school anyway? Not him. Yet when he was deprived of it and could hear the other children reciting and singing in the schoolhouse, he felt woefully lost. Like, so good. It's like the being kept from knowing things again. You know, it's like that. I just like trailed off. I'm like, I have nothing, no words. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead. I just said at a note that I made, not even at a quote.
You're like, that's a good one. Another Maddie character moment. I must learn to control it, Maddie told himself. So like about his power. Then, surprisingly, he began to cry. Maddie had a boyish pride in the fact that he never cried, but now he wept, and it felt as if the tears were cleansing him, as if his body needed to empty itself. Tears ran down his cheeks. Like,
I underlined that one too.
Like, I always love I always get emotional about other people getting emotional, you know, like sort of like, especially with young boy characters. It's like, it's so affecting to see them like, oh, I have feelings and that's okay and I can show them, you know, like, so that always gets me emo. But like, especially the way it's described and like the cleansing and it's like his body had to empty itself.
Sweet boy. The note that I found, I don't want to read the whole scene because it's kind of long, but it's like an early scene where Maddie's talking to Leader and they start talking about fishing or whatever. But at that scene, the last line is he could hear Leader laughing still when he left. And I wrote, that's our Matt, because remember in Gathering Blue when Kira was like, Maddie makes us smile, he makes us laugh. Like, that's what's important and special about him. Like, I just love that she carried that over because it makes me happy.
Yeah. It also, by now, some of the latest group of new ones were out and about, their sores clearing up, their clothes clean and hair combed, frightened faces eased, and their haunted, desperate attitudes changing to something more serene. Their children played now with other children of village, racing down the lanes and paths in games of tag and hide and seek. Watching them, Matty remembered his own child self, his bravado, and the terrible anguish it had concealed. He had not believed anyone would want him, ever, until he came to village, and even then he had not trusted in its kindness for a long time.
I have that one tabbed too. Oh, sweet boy. And then on the next page, it's when he calls Seer my father, and I start to cry again.
Yeah. Oh
man. Okay. Ooh, another kind of long one, a doozy, but the scene when Maddie is with Jean and they're talking about Shakespeare.
Yeah. Okay. This is my next one too. Yeah.
You want to like popcorn read it? Like,
we totally could. Where are you starting?
Genuinely. Here, wait. Yeah, let's do it by paragraph. Ready? Okay. I'm starting from page 89. Once it was books and poetry, she said with sudden and passionate anguish. I remember when I was small, after my mother died, he would tell me stories and recite poems at dinner. Then, later, he told me about the people who had written them.
By the time we studied it in school, you remember, Maddie, studying literature? It was also familiar to me, because of the way he had taught me when I didn't even know he was teaching.
Maddie remembered. He used different voices. Remember Lady Macbeth? Out, damned spot, out, I say. He tried to repeat the lines with the sinister yet regal voice Mentor had used.
Jean laughed. And Macduff. I cried when my father recited Macduff's speech about the deaths of his wife and children.
Maddie remembered that speech well. Standing by the bakery stall with Frolic scampering about at their feet, Maddie and Jean recited the lines together.
All my pretty ones? Did you say all? Oh, Hellkite, all? What, all my pretty chickens and their dam at one fell swoop? I cannot but remember such things were, that were most precious to me.
Then Jean turned away. She continued restacking the loaves on her table, but clearly her thoughts were someplace else. Finally, she looked up at Maddie and said in a puzzled voice, "It was so important to him, and he made it important to me. Poetry and language, and how we use it to remind ourselves of how our lives should be lived."
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
It's so good. And even like later down when Maddie, he's thinking about the woman he met, all my pretty ones. Like, just again, like the use of language, and she's so precise with like, because like that callback, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like she doesn't spell it out. She doesn't like use a bunch of really beautiful like words and descriptions. It's just like very almost like matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm not good at describing it, but
no, it is very matter of fact. I agree. I mean, the line after that is suddenly he felt that they were all of them doomed. Like that is so cut and dry, but the way it is so like explicitly written,
yes,
it's
it
impactful.
connects. Yeah, I'm sorry. What did you say at the end?
Again, I was like, it's impactful, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's like it so clearly connects what they were just talking about stories showing you how to live, and all that she does is she requotes a line, but it's like so perfect. Like, yeah. I think the last one I had that we haven't already talked about is the one where the seer, the blind man, stands up to speak. My boy came here 6 years ago as a child. Many of you remember the Maddie he was then. He fought and swore and stole. Maddie liked the sound of the phrase "my boy," which he had never heard the blind man use before, but he was embarrassed to see people turn and look at him. Yeah. Both my children just like gets me.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. There's like big ol' adopted family energy in this series anyways. That is like really
absolutely
really heartwarming. I also really like this passage with again Maddie and Seer when he's asking him rather to go get Kira. I don't know where to start. You know her, Maddie. You know she had things to accomplish there first. Yes, and she has, Seer. I could tell when I was last there. Things have changed. People take good care of their children now. And he hesitated, unable to speak for a moment because the memory of his own abuse had returned. Then he added simply, Kira made things change. Things are better now. There are only 3 weeks left, Maddie. After the border closes, it will be too late. She won't be allowed to come. You must bring her here before that happens. If you don't, Maddie, I will never see her again. It always seems strange to me when you say see. The blind man smiled. I see in my heart, Maddie.
Yeah. And also just the way that Maddie so concisely like analyzes that, like, you know, it's a caring place because they take care of their children, you know, like that, like it's a community that is healthy now because they take care of the people, of the most vulnerable people, you know, which is like again very in line with the other themes about refugees and immigrants. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oof.
I'm just going to look at these last couple tabs. I don't know if any of them are ones I want to read or if they're just theme things. I like, for tie-ins, I like when Maddie goes into the forest and he straps the puppy to his chest the way Jonas did with Gabriel.
Oh.
Yeah. Sit on that for a while. And also Kira eats an apple at one point. I'm like, a red apple.
I know.
Like it shouldn't, but it's so effective.
Yeah.
Oh, I referenced it earlier, but the line when Kira and Maddie are in the forest and they are in peril. To his dismay, she was removing her embroidery tools. Kira, there's no time. I might be able to. Then she deftly threaded a needle. To what? He wondered bitterly. To create a handsome wall hanging depicting our last hours? He remembered that in the art books he had leafed through at Leaders, many paintings depicted death, a severed head on a platter, a battle and the ground strewn with bodies, swords and spears and fire, and nails being pounded into the tender flesh of a man's hands. Painters had preserved such pain through beauty. Perhaps she would. Which, and then again, too, another crucifixion
Yeah.
reference. Like,
Which,
okay, maybe it was intentional.
right. Which that one I think was much more well woven into the story. Like it was sort of like the references in the first two books where you'd get these like tangential mentions that as like readers we can like, oh, I know what she's talking about. Like even the severed head is like John the
Judith.
Baptist, I'm assuming. Oh, Judith as well.
It could have been.
I think on a platter would be John the
Okay.
Baptist, but yeah, it's,
Well,
I mean, either one.
One of them. No, I think it's a basket. Anyways.
And Judith is also a biblical story, so it could be either. But it's like I think that was much more in line with how she did it in the other books, where it was like hinting at, and we knew exactly what she was referring to, but she didn't need to like say it or like do it so ham-fistedly.
Yeah. She wasn't like, he saw a painting called Starry Night. Like, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm good with quotes. I don't want to read ones from the very end because they'll make me too sad.
We end the live show crying together.
But what an interesting time. So yeah, next up we'll be reading Sun, which is the final book of the Giver Quartet. And okay, no spoilers, but I genuinely want to know, Kara, because as you can probably tell from the title, Sun, or maybe you've read like the back of the book. So the final book follows a birth mother. So I'm curious, whose mother do you think it is?
So it's like a prequel. It's like a, oh my God.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's a prequel, if I remember correctly.
Okay. I'm very intrigued.
Or, because genuinely, I don't think I could tell you accurately. So maybe it's not a prequel. I feel like it was.
We can both be surprised.
Yeah.
Oh man, I can't wait.
No, wait, I think I know. I don't know. We know a lot of Suns.
We do. Yeah. And honestly, like, whichever answer it is, it's gonna be like
Mm-hmm.
emotional damage.
Yep. That was me posting that yesterday. Emotional damage. Emotional damage. Okay.
Yep.
Good talk. Wow. What a story. I hope that the finale is more satisfactory than this book was.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still super glad, obviously, that we read it and we got to discuss it. And there were so many things that were so good. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like, especially with how good the first two books were, it's
I
just like,
know.
this could have been also amazing.
Right.
And
Well, that's the thing that gets me is
but no.
like The Giver to me is a perfect book, no notes. So like the fact that it kind of like declines, I'm like, Lois, pick it back up again now,
Yeah.
please.
Yep.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
thank you, Kara, for all of your incredible insight and discussion. Love it always.
Likewise.
And thank you to anyone who tuned in or is watching this back later. We appreciate it. I know this one was loaded with spoilers, so
Yeah,
hope you love the book.
I know. It's hard not to be for this book specifically, but
Mm-hmm.
and we will be back on Julia's channel again for
Mm-hmm.
our last one.
Yeah. Our last one for this quartet, at least.
Yes, for this quartet. I can't wait to cry.
Yeah, same. All right. Well, I'm going to end the stream. Thank you all again. Goodbye.